Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very short talk on the writers of the Riviera. What we decided to do is that we noticed that there was an awful lot of information that was there on Agatha Christie. And I grew up in Torquay, so I know that everybody knows Agatha Christie's sort of links to Torquay. However, once we started digging a little bit more, we found out there were so many writers that were actually very closely linked with Torquay. And there's another reason we looked at this, is that we realised that a lot of people wanted to go out, a lot of tourists, a lot of locals that were interested in our local community. They actually wanted to go out and they wanted to explore our area, but they wanted a reason to explore our area. So what we decided to do through the Culture Board is to put together a little bit of literary walk. We wanted to start people off at Torquay Harbourside, and we wanted to just give people an opportunity to say, well, that's where somebody used to live, that's where somebody wrote a particular famous novel. So we went through and we looked at a wide range of sort of local authors that people will possibly remember, possibly know, when they were growing up. They might have even studied them at university or school, and then right up to some sort of more modern writers. So if I go right back to the beginnings of Torquay, and in 1800 Torquay only had around 800 people living there. So we were a very, very small rural community. Brixham had around 3,500 people. Let's see, Paynton had around 1,700 residents, but Torquay was very, very small. One of our first visitors that you will have heard of was Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley came to Torquay with her husband, Percy Shelley, another famous poet from that romantic period. And while she was here, she was so impressed with the town, or as it was growing then, that she wrote a children's story. If we move on a little bit further, we have Alfred Lord Tennyson, who actually came to Torquay, wrote one of his poems. And he based it actually on Torbay. There's another one. Charles Kingsley, who wrote The Water Babies, he again came to Torquay, incredibly impressed with the views, and particularly impressed with our seashores. And he wrote a sort of book, an incredibly well illustrated book on sea anemones and sea creatures. A little more contentious in those days was Charles Darwin, who visited Torquay and stayed here just after he'd been writing his books, which are looking at the sort of descent of man, and that really challenged some of those Victorian ideas on evolution versus creationism. And it really sort of was an earthquake in intellectual thought in the mid-19th century. A little bit more modern, we have George Bernard Shaw. He stayed in Torquay. And what we need to remember is that Torquay in those days was very much a place where people came for the winter, particularly came for health reasons. And while they were there, they might spend 2 or 3 months, and it was an incredibly productive place. Torquay in around 1890 was claiming to be the richest town in England. So we attracted nearly all of the great authors. And to go back to George Bernard Shaw, while he was here in 1914, he wrote the great anti-war polemic of his time, and because of that, he pretty much lost his career. It was that time of sort of jingoism, just as the First World War broke out. Going a little bit further back, we have Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who sadly lost her brother in a boating accident in Babbacombe Bay while she lived here. One of my particular favourite authors is a gentleman called Edward Bulwer Lytton. Bulwer Lytton is pretty much forgotten these days. The only time you may hear of him is there's a sort of a spoof, the worst opening line to the novel. But if you dig a little bit deeper to Lord Bulwer Lytton, he was one of the biggest authors in the 19th century, great friend of Charles Dickens, and he was very much involved in producing plays. One of his plays actually ended up being rewritten into an opera by Richard Wagner. That's one of those characters that we really need to spend a little bit more time investigating. Oscar Wilde up in Babbacombe, a little bit further outside our area. Beatrix Potter, and more up to date, we are still producing these great authors. So at the moment we've got Leslie Pierce, who's written a number of very fine novels, and a particular favourite of mine, Adam Neville, who has been called Britain's version of Stephen King. Now, Adam bases an awful lot of his novels. Actually, they are quite hardcore horror novels, so if you're of a faint heart, please don't read them. But he based a lot of those in Torbay, and it's really interesting sort of looking at the way he's actually selected some of the settings in Paint and Brixham and Torquay and put them into his novels. And one of the things I think we are really promoting is Torbay as a centre of culture and a centre of arts. We always used to be, and I think if we encourage that, I'm sure that we can use the natural beauty and the stimulation of the bay in a way to actually encourage a greater sort of cultural heritage and a recognition of what's there, and let's build on it. I'm Dr. Kevin Dixon, a local historian. I'm here in Torquay on the English Riviera, and I'm here to introduce you to a local literary trail. In 1929, the Irish author James Joyce came to Torquay, and he stayed at the Imperial Hotel, which is just behind me. Joyce actually came to Torquay to do an analysis of his most famous novel, and that novel is known throughout the world. That novel was called Ulysses. Torquay began as a health resort. It was also a terrific place to retire to, as it is today. One of those people who actually retired to Torquay was a gentleman called Edward Baldwin Lytton, or Lord Lytton, and he lived in this house behind me, which was then called Argyle Hall. It's now an apartment block. Many of us have forgotten about Lord Lytton, but he was one of the most famous authors of the 19th century. Many people think that phrases "Sir Penny's Might and the Sword" were Shakespeare. They were actually Lord Lytton's. Lord Lytton came here after writing a series of novels. He was also part of Britain's colonial empire. There's towns named after him in Canada and in Australia. And one of the unusual things about Lord Lytton is he invented quite a number of words. He invented a word called vril, which came out of a science fiction book that he wrote, and that name eventually translated into the well-known drink Bovril. In 1817, Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, visited Torquay. She came here with her husband Percy Shelley, the poet, and what Mary saw when she was here was a town in transition. It was moving between a collection of small rural and fishing villages into becoming the richest town in England. While Mary was here, she wrote a short children's story called Maurice, which was lost for nearly 100 years and found again in the Palazzo in Italy.
Welcome to the home of Agatha Christie and a literary trail like no other. I'm Matt Newbury, a walker, swimmer and author, and I'd like to tell you more. Welcome to the beautiful Princess Gardens here in sunny Torquay. Agatha Christie featured these gardens in her book The ABC Murders, which is one of her most popular and intriguing novels. Directly behind me you can see the pavilion, which is where Archie Christie proposed to Agatha Christie following a Wagner concert. You can also see the fountain behind me. There's a sister fountain to this outside the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, so we're in illustrious company here in Torquay. Welcome to the Princess Pier here in Torquay, which opened in 1890, which was the year that Agatha Christie was born. And as a young girl, you used to be able to roller skate here for a cost of 2p if you bought your own skates. And in the background, you've got another place called the Grand Hotel, which is a bit of a French chateau looking hotel. And this was where Agatha Christie spent her honeymoon in 1914 on Christmas Eve, just before her husband went off to war.
Kevin, you said about the literary walk, that something to do with the culture board that you've been involved with. Could you tell us a little bit more about where it goes and where it starts and how long it is, those sorts of things, and how people can find out about it?
Absolutely. I mean, what we did was there's two ways of actually getting into the literary walk. The first of all is actually go on the internet, and we'll put the sort of website address on there. And the other is to sort of pick one of these up. And if I can just unfold it, and here's the literary walk. And on one side, it's actually got the sort of general map of where it is.
Oh, brilliant!
And then it's numbered, so, and you can't see it terribly well. I'm sure you can't see it on film. But it starts off on Torquay Harbour side, and then it gives you then it's numbered. So, for example, if we start off with number 1 at Torquay Harbour side with Mary Shelley, and then it gives a little bit of an introduction about who Mary Shelley was, that kind of romantic background to Torquay. Then the next site is Bernard Shaw. Now you don't have to walk right the way up to Bernard Shaw's house, but it's way up and it's now been replaced with lots of flats. But it'll just say, if you look up here, you can actually see Bernard Shaw's house.
Okay. This
is why he was interesting. I think he's the only double winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature and things. So it's really interesting characters. Elizabeth Barrett Browning again around the harbour side, and then you can have as lazy or as an exciting walk as you actually want, because some of the views you get from the top of Rock Walk are pretty stunning.
Yeah.
So you can easily, we encourage people to walk up there if you can,
Yeah.
but it's designed for, you just want to get an easy stroll or just stay around the harborside thing to do. But if you go up there, you can have a better view of, for example, the top of Rock Walk is where Lord Tennyson wrote his poem from. So it's nice to actually see.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've even been up there at times where we've actually read his poem.
Oh, it'd be nice if that was actually included in your literature, actually.
It's quite a long one. You can easily download it.
Yeah.
People have got those mobile phones.
Yes, true.
You can actually pretend to be Lord Tennyson, and you can sort of look over the bay and you can actually see this. So that's quite a nice one. And if you did want to walk as far as the Grand Hotel or Corbin Head, please do. I mean, right over there is actually some of the places that's the rock pools that Kingsley actually looked at.
Yeah.
So it's actually being there, and you can actually read sections out of his book, and you can.
I think
it's
it's really nice.
Exciting. And the idea also is just to encourage people to get some exercise.
Yeah, completely.
And we've spent 5 months sitting at home watching. Well, I have just watching the television.
Yeah.
And to actually physically get out there and just immerse yourself, in the beauty of Torbay, the beauty of Torquay, and the excitement, and try and put yourself back into how, I don't know, somebody like Sean O'Casey, would have looked at Torquay Harbourside, and somebody from that sort of Irish Republican background, he ended up retired in Torquay.
Yeah.
So, how did they feel? How did they think? And then our great colleague Matt from Torbay is actually he's pretty much an expert on Agatha Christie. Then there's that whole layer of Agatha Christie, from Princess Pier to Torbay to the Harbourside, and you can immerse yourself really in this whole thing about Edwardian Torquay and how she saw it and how her contemporaries saw it, and you can point out a few places that novels were written in, which we all know today.
So is it ever guided, or is it just a self-guided walk?
This one's pretty much self-guided.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, sort of with your passion, if there are other people that shared your passion, to actually take people around and get them thinking, as you say, of the different eras and everything, would be really interesting.
Well, absolutely, and I've done a number of guided walks on this, and I just feel it's really such fun.
Yeah.
And I remember we did and anybody can get involved. I remember we did a walk from Castle Circus down to the Harbourside, looking at old buildings. Not to do with this, but it attracted people you never thought. And I remember we did this walk with about 10-15 people, and we're saying, this is old building. We went down Temperance Street where the CDT buildings are.
Oh yeah.
This is what this used to be. And 4 homeless men said, can we join in?
Oh, wonderful.
And and I always think that local history, and local culture and literature is the most democratic of arts and sciences. Never figured out whether it's an art or a science yet. But it brings everybody together. And unlike other sciences where you might need a bit of equipment, like if you want to do astronomy, you need a telescope, or you want to get into geology, anyway. But with local history, anybody, anywhere can be interested. So I think it just sucks people in and people get really excited. And nobody's an expert. As long as you love it, it's yours.
Lovely.
So yeah, I mean, I've done these walks, and I've done the poetry walks, and I've done the guided walks, and it's just so much fun. But whenever I give a talk, I know some things are hard work, but I know when you come to local history, you don't have to do the work. You just say to people, go out and tell us what you remember.
Yeah.
And people will, and they say, oh, when I was 14, I used to do ballroom dances in a town hall.
Yes.
And it just sucks people in, and people love these little nuggets of. And it won't stop here.
Brilliant.
We're already talking about doing a musical tour of Torquay, from punk bands to, Torbay monks chanting to drumming somewhere. So it's all there, and it's what they call a palimpsest, layer after layer of interest, and that's why I think the whole thing's so exciting.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I'm definitely going to have a go at this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.